Lot of copies. Where did you watch the clips? Oh, at the park right next to our house. There are other places in Burlington that have tons of cool, like astronomers presenting the whole time. But with a 6 and a 14-year-old next to the playground with all the other 6-year-olds, we could actually look at the eclipse.
Interesting to see the revenue. You know, there's a bump.
There's definitely a bump in Burlington. It's a local ice cream shop.
Such a fabulous day. And
Like Vermont performed.
everyone was just thinking about the eclipse.
Well, I forgot to tell you.
It's amazing that, I mean, I think there were a few accidents, a few car accidents. 89.
Well, we saw Commissioner Transportation, I should know his name. And he was 6 or 8.
I mean,
Despite, high traffic, there were more in the snowstorm 2 days before.
Oh, hey. If everybody was really pumped about that. That's fine. Yeah.
well,
Okay, I started to talk to my case team, and so we're thinking like, oh, should we invite, and it was like, if I'm gonna invite upstairs, I'm gonna this in my check, but I'd rather have both of us. But also I can do it
Yeah,
myself.
and I'm sure that I want to invite them, so that's kind of the kind of thing that I want to talk about, is how we want to.
I mean, I'm thinking about being a service to them.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just.
Which is also possible.
We can't sell products at the graveyard?
Just, well, if you're ready, I'll show it. Of course, yeah, because I operate slower.
As
Yeah,
long as the resident.
yeah. I just want to last Thursday, like to know, because like,
I'm just waiting to see.
so I need to get my, I mean, I'm a very plotter.
Yes.
I need to get a signature.
Yeah.
I
I
got my phone printed out today, yeah, start getting signatures.
Ooh.
Yeah, you're signing, yeah.
But you don't see that.
Expensive. It's a choice meeting tonight. I'm sure you.
Send it out
Oh, wonderful.
tomorrow also. But if you give me one of those, I'll just give an FYI.
Very city.
With you yesterday. We do not have our fellow co-chair yet, which is why I'm stalling, but I think we'll start. Just gonna send her a text and give me one second.
Andy's the director.
In the interest of time. So welcome everyone to April 11th, 2024 Climate Solutions Caucus meeting. A couple of FYIs, just so that we don't have to shift gears. First agenda for today, just going to do a quick run through of where we're at when we do a check in terms of what our policy priorities were for this session, and how we're doing on those. It's pretty impressive, really. I mean, granted, we still have a lot of work to do in the next 4 weeks, and there's still a lot more testimony and discussion and debate. And I'll run through that really quickly. That'll be like a minute. Just a heads up that on Tuesday, April 16th, from 5 to 7 at Hugo's Bar and Grill, the Energy Action Network holds a Leveraging Change speaker series. And on Tuesday night, they are having 3 guest visitors to discuss the topic of the benefits of helping high mileage drivers go electric. And the reason why I'm highlighting this is because this was actually something that was passed in 2 years ago or last year in the transportation bill. So thank you to our transportation committee members and everybody else who supported the bill. It is unique in the nation to take this approach, but it also makes a lot of sense when you think about it in terms of bang for the buck. If someone is, having to drive a lot or uses very large or very low MPG internal combustion engines, you end up seeing a much larger return by helping them shift in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions by helping them shift off of an internal combustion engine. So hence the highlight. If you want more information and to register, you can go to eanvt.org for more information. And then after I go through this quick walkthrough, because I think the public health conversation we have, once we kick it off, I will just let the conversation go from there. So I just wanted to highlight, in January, we set forth, it was one pager, but it was crammed, 2024 priorities. We had 5 sub-bullets under improve community resilience, including adopting a suite of policies to reduce the risk of flood damage. We had expand the municipal planning and resilience grants program, advancing thermal energy networks, and then 2 other sub-bullets related to funding and developing climate resilience and mitigation budget opportunities. So we have 3 bills that are really, have these elements in them. We have S213, which made it out of the Senate and is now in House Environment Energy. We have H687, which is the Act 250 reform bill, which does have language in there related to municipal planning and resilience grants program. And we have S305, which is currently in House Environment and Energy, which has a discussion currently, underway regarding thermal energy networks. We had another high level category of holding fossil fuel companies accountable. And part of the reason why we started late today is because we had a joint House Environment and Energy and House Judiciary Committee meeting to hear S259, which made it out of the Senate 26-3. And that is the sort of Superfund bill that's modeled off of how we treat hazardous materials and rather hazardous waste. So very similar structure, and we've done it before via law. We have modernized the renewable energy standard, H289, which is in the Senate now. We have Reform Act 250, which is H687, also in the Senate. Invest in climate-friendly transportation solutions, H868, also in the Senate. Also here, we had ensuring low-income Vermonters can afford energy. And that is also under discussion in S305 in the House Environment and Energy Committee. We have divesting state pension funds from fossil fuels. S42 is in House GovOps. And we have prohibiting the sale, distribution, and use of neonicotinoid pesticides. That made it through the House. And we have assessing and addressing the effect of climate change on the health of the population of Vermont, hence today. And then we also had ensuring coordination and support for growing the climate workforce, which was 2 weeks ago. So I just want to applaud everybody for the work that has been done and keeping our eye on the ball for the work to come, because there's always more to do. But it's a great opportunity to just take stock of how much work has been done. And with that, I'm going to pass the torch to Representative Dara Torrey, who's going to give a quick overview of this joint Climate Solutions Caucus and Public Health Caucus meeting.
Is it posted somewhere?
It is posted, and we can also follow up via email. Perfect. Thank you. Do you want to come up here?
Oh, yeah, can everybody see it? So thank you, Gabrielle, and everyone who showed up today, because this is exciting for us. The Public Health Caucus just got started this session. And a number of Public Health Caucus members here and steering committee members, Kate, Representative Nugent from South Burlington, Representative Goldman from Rockingham, Representative Lally from Shelburne. And we've been working with Dan Olson, who's director of Vermont Health Association, kind of getting our heads around just how much of an opportunity there is for legislators to really embrace public health in all of our work. And you may have recall this, really elevating public health and making connections in what we do in our various committees. So for me, just personally, I want to just say quickly that I was working in clean energy policy and kept hearing about all these co-benefits, public health co-benefits from what we get when we mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And I was eager to learn more about public health. And I was able to find online a curriculum from the Yale School of Public Health that was specifically about public health and climate change, designed for public health practitioners and others in the space to skill build and to really become advocates for making important climate changes and using their medical public health positions to really do that. So it was fascinating. It's the first of its kind in 2018. I joined the 2019 cohort. And since then, it's been amazing to see just how much leadership there is coming from our educational institutions, how many new programs there are and public health programs around the country that are specifically calling out climate change and all of the extra power that brings. And we learned about some of that today and just the hearing that Representative Stebbins mentioned this morning about the Climate Superfund Act. We are in a whole new place, the ability to model and really understand accountability. And now I'm thinking all that modeling can really come to the fore for us when we look at benefits, quantifying benefits from the policies we're proposing that are going to keep Vermonters safe and healthier. So I would love to just share maybe via email with you some links to get more information on some of these webinars that are coming out of the public health community around climate change and newsletters and things like that you might be interested in receiving. So with that, hand it over to Dan Olson.
Great. Is there a way to get up there?
I'm sorry, I'm late. She just got out of committee.
We're doing this thing on like Act 250. Did you guys talk about that at all? I mean, it takes a little bit of time to really get through those.
I'm sorry.
So.
Thank you, Leslie.
Let's see if I can get this to go on the presentation. So my name is Dan Olson, Executive Director of the Vermont Public Health Association. The Vermont Public Health Association has been around since 2002. We're the home for public health professionals, students, and community champions in the state. Since 2002, we've been hard at work trying to connect and to mentor and to empower public health professionals within our state. And there's such a crossover, obviously, with the topic of climate change. My professional career started in 2000, so I predate the organization by a couple of years. And the majority of my career has actually not been spent in public health, but in climate. I spent the first part of my career at Harvard University looking at university operations from a climate perspective, moved into corporate consulting around greenhouse gas accounting and mitigation, and eventually moved to the advocacy side as the executive director of an environmental nonprofit focused on climate. More recently, I've shifted into the public health space. And so this is a great opportunity for me to fuse those two different parts of my professional career arc and hopefully share some framing around how these two disciplines go together. So if you'll indulge me, I wanted to actually go back in time just for a minute because I used to do a lot of speaking around climate change. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I said, well, what we used to talk about 10, 15, 20 years ago when we talked about climate change and addressing impacts. And this slide is like burned into my memory. So this is 2009 presentation. This is 9 different pieces of legislation that were proposed in the 110th Congress. And they were all trying to figure out different mechanisms for how we as a country would meet the challenge proposed by climate change. 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Critically, peaking year of emissions needed to be 2015. Of these, one actually passed out of the House, and get this, with bipartisan support. It was a Waxman-Markey bill, and it proposed 83% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. It didn't go anyplace. There was a threat of a filibuster in the Senate. But I just wanted to go back to a moment in time when there was serious legislation being proposed at the national level for tackling climate change, not from a state by state or kind of a regional perspective, but comprehensively at a national level, having the type of global leadership that we really needed to stave off some of the worst impacts of climate change. At this time, I also used to pepper my presentations with little funny quotes. Hard to see the details, but they were dark, but also meant to be a little bit humorous. And I looked through this presentation. I said, you know, these cartoons are not as funny to me anymore because 2015 has come and gone, and we have not yet bent that emissions curve.
Can you read them?
Sure, the one on the left says, oh, okay, I see your point, but you have to balance that against the convenience of my lifestyle. While the planet burns. And the other one is always been a favorite of mine. Yeah, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. So these dark. So these hit a little bit differently now that it's not 2009, because the reason I share these is there was at that moment in time, when I started working in 2010, I never used to talk about adaptation. Never. The focus was always on mitigation because we were going to bend that emissions curve and we weren't going to have to deal with the worst projections. And it's been a while since I've done a climate presentation. So are folks familiar with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change? Hopefully most people in this room are. The sixth assessment report just came out in March, just last month. Has anyone looked through any of the sixth assessment report of the IPCC? It's worth it. As you might know, the IPCC does a fantastic job breaking down their resources into policymaker-friendly documents. So I would take a look at the IPCC's sixth assessment report. And I started going through it last night because I used to actually read them. And I accidentally clicked into a presentation version of the highlights. And I got to slide 3 and I stopped. I didn't need to go any further because this was slide 3. That's not slide 3. This is slide 3. So this is a slide in the IPCC's most recent report. And I don't think scientists have ever been so concise, ever. It's a very clear message here, right? So the pace and scale of climate action are insufficient to tackle climate change. Now, I'm glad that we are in a state where we can point to a long list of pieces of legislation that are moving right now. And we should feel proud of that. But this is also a global phenomenon, right? And currently emissions continue to rise on a year-over-year basis. So I think this is the starting point for our conversation is there is still so much work to be done because all that the climate cares about is the amount of emissions in the air. Doesn't matter where it's coming from. And timing matters. So as we talk about that, I just wanted to, timing matters, but also each and every one of us has a different why this matters to us. And so I just threw up a little photo collage because photo collages are always fun. But this is some of my why. Why do I care about climate? Perhaps similar to many of you, it's because of the people in my life and what is the world that we inhabit today and that we will inhabit a decade from now, 2 decades from now. For the kids in this picture, what is their climate inheritance? What are we leaving to them? And so this is a bit of my motivation as we move into the discussion of what are the health impacts of climate change on the people in this photo and all of our friends and family and the people in our team, the people that you represent. And thankfully, the Vermont Public Health Association, very small budget. We have a big parent organization called the American Public Health Association, big budget. I'm going to use a number of infographics that they've created just to help create a frame. I don't think anything in here is going to be particularly new to you, but I want to show a way of framing and talking about different categories, the different impacts of climate change that perhaps might be valuable. And I've linked to everything here because all of these resources are publicly available and can be used in your own work. So the American Public Health Association talks about the impact of climate change, 4 big categories: rising temperatures, extreme weather, air quality, and vector-borne diseases. And so we'll go through those fairly quickly here. So climate change and global warming means rising temperatures. And as I think many people experienced last summers are getting hotter. And with that increased temperature, there's more heat stress. So dehydration, heat stroke, and complications for a wide number of health and cardio or pulmonary diseases. And there's one little image you're going to see that pops up in almost every slide, and that's that little lower right-hand corner. It's a little hard to see, but mental health diseases, the impact of health, and basically so many different climate drivers on mental health. And we'll come back to that at the end. And so I throw up one more graph here. So this is from the CDC modeling on the projected extreme heat days. And of course, there's a little tab up there where you're supposed to be able to look at different emission scenarios, like a low emission scenario, a medium, and a high. They only give you the low option. And I can only imagine it's because that's all you need to see. So this is extreme heat day projections over time. We're in 2016 to 2045. We're moving into 2036 to 2065.
And that's number of days.
So this is number of days with extreme heat as defined as 90 degrees or hotter. And now we're going to move into 2070 to 2099. You can see that growing red, intense color.
And that's low emissions.
This is the low emissions, which no one thinks we're actually going to be hitting the low emission scenario. Let's just be clear about that.
Mexico looks okay.
It's great.
Sorry, it's so heavy. Sometimes you gotta laugh.
But I actually, for a moment, I felt a bit as if I was being manipulative here because I didn't zoom in on Vermont. I didn't zoom in on the Northeast. You notice that deep intensity is not in the Northeast. But there's two things that I decided to keep it like this because there's 2 points that I think this helps us narrow in on. The first is that heat intensity is relative to where you are, what you're accustomed to. So the houses that we have built have not been built for high temperatures. I moved into a condo and air conditioning is not like a standard feature in houses as it would be in different parts of the country. So our experience of increasing temperatures is also qualified by how we've set up our infrastructure to deal with those heat increases. Secondly, has anyone ever walked through downtown Manhattan when it's 105 degrees out? Because I have. And if you had to do that 30 days a year like this projects, you're going to move north. I'm dead serious. Like, what we see here is that while we can look at what are the impacts on Vermont, we have to be looking more globally because this type of distress is going to cause people to seek out relief. And so being the not deep red color on this graph may not necessarily save us from the disruptions that other areas are going to be facing because of that actual heat. And of course, the other part is in Vermont, there are two different populations and how it's going to affect us. There are people who have the money to go and buy air conditioning and to run that air conditioning, and there are people who don't. And so how people are able to cope with what may not be a deep red color, but a change for Vermonters is real, and it's going to affect lower income people much more severely than it will affect people who are wealthy.
Can I just add something to that?
Please.
I serve on the corrections committee and the majority of our correctional facilities are not air conditioned. And some of them end up getting into the 80s and even the 90s during the summer all the time in the house. Like even in the evening, they don't cool down enough. And so there are lots of places where this is a real issue and a health issue too, for people to be subjected to.
I would also amend your statement in that it already is impacting the lowest income persons.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So if we shift to air quality, increased pollution, but also more intense wildfires. And what is that going to lead to? Well, again, cardiovascular disease or aggravated respiratory illnesses. Another interesting part of air quality is the increased allergy-related illness. So as we have warmer and perhaps longer growing seasons, we actually have a lot more allergens, and you can quantify how much what toll that has on people's, if there's any allergy sufferers here, it can be a significant health issue. My story for air quality, of course, is that for most of my career of last 20 years, I'm from New York, originally lived in Boston. I feel myself as a Northeasterner, but I've been gone from the Northeast for the last 20 years. I've been living out west in Wyoming, Colorado, and Oregon. And we're not climate refugees. I didn't come back to Vermont because I wanted to leave the West. But I did have in the back of my mind, at least I won't have to deal with wildfire smoke. Well, so we're here for 1 year and then we get our wildfire smoke. So we may have brought that, I apologize, but this is a real issue, right? So in the West, And this wasn't true when I first moved out west, but when you were planning your summer vacations, you would plan around what you thought would be the worst part of the fire season. Like it's becoming it's becoming a season. And perhaps that will be the same in the Northeast in the future as well. So vector-borne diseases. When we have warmer temperatures, the vectors that spread disease move.
What is vector?
A vector, so in this case, mostly mosquitoes and ticks. So a vector is something that can deliver that illness. I will show you. This is the incidence of Lyme disease, 2001 to 2015. And so we can see when we don't have as cold winters and tick populations are able to thrive and expand, so too do the diseases that they carry. This is also really prevalent. My son, he's 10 years old. When he was really young, he had a great book and it said the world's deadliest animals. Of course, does anyone know, I'm not sure if the animal is the correct term. I might be giving myself away here, but the deadliest non-human is the mosquito, right? Millions of people die from mosquito bites and the diseases that they are carrying, and by far is the most dangerous insect/animal. And with warmer years in Vermont, we expect to continue to see increasing prevalence of mosquito-borne illnesses that we're not used to seeing in Vermont. So vector-borne diseases, again, we are not likely to be, we're starting to see malaria in parts of the United States where malaria was never something that was an issue here, right? So again, I'm not saying that in the next 10 years, we're going to become a malarial hotbed. That's not what this is suggesting, but we are living in a world where the threats to our health are shifting as the climate shifts, and very few of them are shifting in a positive direction. And this is the last of the four, and I end on it purposefully, extreme weather. So obviously when there is a massive flood happening or extreme weather events, there's the danger of the moment, but then there's also the destruction of the infrastructure. And we can't sit here in Montpelier and not understand how impactful this is on people's lives, even when people are not dying in flood events. But when this is what downtown looks like, and the amount of energy and effort that's taken to then rebuild after those floodwater recedes, and the mental stress of having to question, when will this happen next? Because it's not the 500-year flood, right? Is it the 100-year flood? Is it the 10-year flood? People cannot cope with this type of event and the likelihood that it happens more and more frequently without having some degree of mental anguish or despair. So this is a framing, a way of looking at these topics. And in each and every one of these categories, increasingly, we can begin to quantify the benefits. So when we're looking at legislation, I hope that with all those pieces of legislation, we're asking the question, can we quantify the public health impacts and benefits? Because it's another really important way of looking at potential solutions. And it also really, again, brings me back to this question of mental health. When I think of the biggest impact on Vermonters from a health perspective, you have to look at the mental health impacts here. And I'll just say it one more time, because essentially this is the updated, the only graph I'll show you from that IPCC report, which I know you're all going to run back and read. But this is the new projections, right? The new emissions curve that we need to be on. And if you can see, I don't know if I can, they put a pointer up here, but this is where we are today. And once again, if we were to meet 1.5 degrees Celsius, keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, our emissions globally need to drop off a cliff tomorrow. That's very unlikely given the absolute dysfunction of federal legislation, and if you look at it from a global context. So again, when we first started when I first started in dealing with climate change, we did not focus on adaptation. And now that's all I focus on. Part of the reason that I moved into the public health field is, in addition to all the work we need to do to continue to bend this emissions curve, we also have to make sure that we are supporting in the myriad different ways that people are going to need the support. How do we cope with a climate disrupted future? And to me, sometimes I look back to history to say, like, we always feel like our crisis is the crisis, right? But if you were born, before World War II, I'm sure that felt pretty hairy as well. And so you look at, like, how did the leaders of that time motivate people? Because I know that with this presentation, people are like, oh man, it's going to be so heavy. Like, make sure you end on a high note, right? Like, make sure you tell a nice story. And I refuse to do that because I don't think that actually helps us. I'm reading a book called The Splendid and the Vile. If anyone's ever read that, it's about
Fantastic book.
World War II, Winston Churchill and his inner circle, and how they coped with what at the time was just an insanely existential threat to the future in their minds of Western civilization. And they were the bulwark against that eventuality. And in his first address to Parliament, he didn't say, let's look at the positive side of the imminent invasion of the earth. I'm sure you all wanted to learn another language, right? Like, what he said was, I have nothing to offer you, I forget the exact words, but blood, tear, toil, and sweat. And order, right? And that didn't cause people to curl up. Well, I'm sure many of them were curled up in the corner. But it was a leader who was having a clear-eyed view of the threat and the fact that we need to rise to the challenge. Because if we don't, look at what we have to lose. And sometimes I feel like from a policy perspective, and politicians are afraid to ask people to rise to the challenge as much as perhaps people are capable of doing. And importantly, with that request or with that promise of what he had to offer, I think people are also able to look at leadership and see that they were working furiously to meet the challenge. And when I think of the mental health threat of climate change, I actually don't think of the threat as what are we having to experience from climate change? I think the biggest challenge from a mental health perspective is seeing leaders unable to help us rise to that challenge. We need leaders who can inspire and help us rise to the challenge. And when you are motivated in that way, we can overcome daunting odds. But only when we can see that we have leaders who are clear-eyed helping us see what the problem is and are doing what we need to do to rise to the moment. And so mental health is where I want to end on. And I think that all of the leaders in this room have a really important role to play in helping to galvanize constituents and be part of ensuring that we're not wallowing in despair, but that we're doing what we can to meet the moment. So I'm happy to share this presentation. I think maybe we already have, and the resources that are in it. But I don't think anything is new here, but I do think it's great to continue to ground our discussion of climate impacts in health, because it is something that is unavoidable. People feel it in their bodies and they see their friends and their family and their community suffering. And it's a way to connect with people on a visceral level that I think is a powerful engagement tool. So that, yeah. Sure.
That was fantastic. I took a lot of notes, mostly at the tail end. We have, it's 12:43. If like one or two or three people have questions or comments or discussion. I love how much time we always have for deep, meaningful conversation in the State House. 3 minutes.
I just want to thank you for highlighting the impacts of climate change and natural disasters on people's health. But in particular, you spoke about Lyme disease, et cetera. But I'm thinking of the flooding in Berry City and the increase in cancers that will result from those waters washing across oil storage tanks and gas stations and just disseminating horrifically dangerous chemicals into our communities. So, and so I appreciate you touching on that. I just wanted to thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, and I don't know if there's, maybe other folks in the room know, I don't know if there's been modeling that shows how, because the impact is there, but
Yeah.
can we quantify it? I don't know if we can.
I've been speaking to some Tulane PhD students who are trying to study the floods impacts on central Vermont. And that is one of the things they want to look into, because there really isn't, because in the weeks and months that followed, people who were cleaning out and everything, they had rashes and infections in their eyes. It was very distressing to see it pervasively across the entire city. So, thank you.
One thing that's different about this crisis, this existential crisis, from what our parents, grandparents faced in the middle of the century, is that was the kind of a threat people could understand. That was a kind of a threat that people had faced, for millennia. And this is something completely different and global and diffuse, and we don't have a concept of how to face a global challenge. And I think you're right. I mean, I've been thinking about how we need to be focusing on adaptation and more than mitigation. But so here we are passing the RES and Global Warming Solutions Act and the Clean Heat Standard, and all of these things that are in effect focused on mitigation, on doing our part and cleaning up our pollution, which we have to do. But the folks who don't support those policies are saying, wait a minute, we're spending all this, why would we spend a bunch of money on, whatever the money is, on that, when we can see the kinds of destruction that's happening, that we need to adapt to, the things that are happening in Barrie and Montpelier and everywhere. And, maybe they have a point. And actually, we need to engage with those folks too. And so I don't know, that's what I'm thinking about. This political polarization is paralyzing us.
Yeah, and I've
Got to get past it.
And I would just say that I don't think, when we first started talking about climate change, I think that there was a moment where we could have, as a people, understood. I think it's so important to realize that the reason we cannot conceptualize it is because so much work has been done to make sure that we don't.
Well, that's absolutely true. And
Which goes to the political polarization.
and go, climate superfund. But I feel like our major, I've always thought of the climate issue and transitioning off of fossil fuels as the central problem of industrial civilization. Actually, our central problem now is polarization, it seems to me.
Rep Pouch, and then we'll do Rep Nugent, and then we should wrap up.
Great, thank you. I'll be quick. I really, it resonated, the mental health piece and the lack of leadership, both of those things. I mean, I think of my kids and younger generation folks. They don't really even see a future. It's like there's just despair in that
Young
future.
people.
And you look at suicide, and all of those things. I mean, it's here right now. And there doesn't appear to be anything happening that is going to change that. So that was a big piece. So I appreciated that.
Rep Nugent.
I'm really inspired by Churchill also for many reasons, but national background, and having read a bunch of stuff and thought similarly, like, how did they face this? I do think at the time, like, it's easy to see from now how clearly it was, but you had writers like Virginia Woolf who were saying democracy is lost, we should just give in to the Nazis. Like, I think that they were in as much of a felt like a fog as we feel now. And I do think that one reason I've always loved Churchill too is because he was this grumpy conservative guy that like alienated half the people. I'm like, how can someone like that, save democracy basically? And so I don't know.
Our own grumpy as conservative.
Yeah, it could be, you never know.
Thank you so much for coming. That was incredibly inspiring and a good reminder that we need to be clear-eyed, and we need to not just accept whatever a constituent says, but to really ask So what are you bringing to the table? Because we need to all roll our sleeves up.
Well, so leaders, I think is,
Yeah.
that has to come from us.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you, Public Health Caucus.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Great presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Olson, way to go. That was,